extra quick spot.
Oh, yeah. All right.
I tell you what, a person who believes that this wasn't set up by our own government is an idiot.
Okay. All right, so we are back at it. Part 4, taking a look at and trying to understand the new SAT essay. Okay, well, we're at the end of the passage. We completed going over the passage, and so now we want to deal with the question. But before we get to the actual question that we are asked on the new SAT essay, I want to make a comment about how essays on standardized tests are structured. Now, but the key word here is standardized, meaning that there is a standard that can be assessed, but based on what? Based on what you should have learned prior to you taking that particular test. And it could be the SAT, it could be the AP or the ACT. It doesn't really matter what test you're taking. It's standard, meaning that you should have learned certain skills prior to taking that test that are universal, skills that are universal. So no matter, where you are physically, you should have been exposed to. And this is what a standardized test is. It's supposed to be assessing a standard. Well, definitely the essay is no different in this, because when you spend time in an English class, there are certain things you are going to cover. One of them is writing an extended discussion or extended discussion in written form, whether you call it an essay, whether you call it a composition. It really doesn't matter what it's called. The steps you take in order to accomplish the task of writing an extended discussion, it should pretty much be the same. So no matter who your English teacher was, or where you lived when you learned how to write an extended discussion, there's some things that you should have learned. For instance, you should have learned or been exposed to this idea of the writing process, because obviously writing is a process. Or maybe I'll put it a different way. Writing has to be a process at a certain stage or at a certain level, because it's like writing isn't necessarily a process when you're writing a sentence, but it does become a process when you learn how to write a paragraph. But when you start writing an essay, it has to be a process, because you have multiple ideas that you're trying to discuss. You have multiple things you would like to mention while discussing that. And in addition to that, someone else is going to be reading it. So they need to have a certain expectation as far as where information should be, thus making the communication process easier. So this is why everyone learns this, what we call the writing process, in order to, develop something in a standard way. Now, the American essay, its format is basic 4 or 5 paragraphs. And these paragraphs are situated in a particular way. You have the introduction, you have the body, and you have the conclusion. This is the standard essay or American essay format. Now you may not have to have 5 paragraphs or even 4 paragraphs in order for it to be an American essay, but you do have to have that structure of an introduction, a body, and a conclusion. And this is where the writing process comes in, because the writing process, it is made up of steps that take you from the beginning, which is the introduction, through the body, to the conclusion. And you're giving advice along the way, or as you move from step to step. Well, obviously, there has to be a first step. And in my opinion, and this is how, I go about teaching the writing process. In my opinion, understanding the question is the first step. Because if you don't understand the question, then obviously you're probably not going to make it to the second step. Or if you do make it to the second step, it's not going to be a good outcome. So you must understand the question. So to me, that is the first step of the writing process, is understanding the question. The beautiful thing about the SAT or standardized tests in general is that it's assessing you on a standard. So that means that it has to follow in itself, through that assessment, a particular formula consistently. Because if it's testing you on a standard, then it in itself has to be a standard. And the beautiful thing about the SAT is that no matter how many times you take the test, dealing with the essay, you're always going to come in contact with the same standard or the same structure of the question. So once you understand the structure of the question, you never really have to think about it again. After that, it's how you're going to, content that particular structure and, finish the writing process. Step 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 and 7 and so on. So what I want to talk about first, obviously, is the question. And in analyzing the question and other questions like it, was able to find a way to strip away the content that you're being questioned about. I was able to strip that away. Okay, so let's take a look here. Okay, so this is where we ended. Obviously, we had 9 paragraphs for the reading passage. And let's always keep in mind that the reading passages are going to be between 650 to 750 words. So it's not going to be a small passage that you're dealing with. So always come to this essay with that in mind, that I'm going to have to read something, well, based on the time frame, which is 50 minutes, something substantial. I'm going to have to read something substantial. It's not necessarily going to be easy. And maybe, so in that way you can mentally prepare yourself for what you have to do. So let us read the question now. The question immediately follows the passage, and let's read it together here. Write an essay in which you explain how Jimmy Carter builds an argument to persuade his audience that the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge should not be developed for industry. In your essay, analyze how Carter uses one or more of the features listed in the box above. And the box that is referred to here is that very first box at the top before the passage. And we went over those features, and we discovered that those features are in essence ethos, pathos, and logos. So they're asking us to use one or more of the features listed in that box, or features of your own choice, to strengthen the logic and persuasiveness of his argument. Be sure that your analysis focuses on the most relevant features of the passage. Your essay should not explain whether you agree with Carter's claims but rather explain how Carter builds an argument to persuade his audience. So let's look back at this question. First off, we need to understand that this in itself is not an argumentative essay in the sense that you are just going to give your opinions and thoughts and feelings based on your own personal, judgments. No, and this is a very crucial point. This is a very crucial point. You are being asked to analyze what you have read and use what you have read to support your analysis. And that's it. So in other words, you're not going to bring anything from outside into. You're going to bring everything or anything from inside into. Inside in this case means inside the passage. So you must keep your examples, your points, strictly based on what's inside the passage. And I can't really stress that enough because, I began by saying that this is a critique essay, which in essence it is. What you're being asked here is to analyze the rhetorical use of the language of the author. But that's just it, of the author. So you have to really struggle. And I know this is going to be a hard, especially if you're reading a passage on something you have already taken a position on. And you're going to come in contact with these passages. You have to sideline your position, especially if it disagrees with the position the author is taking. You have to sideline that and focus on what the author is saying. I can't stress that enough. So let's go back to the beginning of the question. Let's analyze this question here and see if we can, find a standard for it. Write an essay in which you explain how Jimmy Carter builds an argument to persuade his audience. So you're being asked to talk about how he presents his argument. How he presents his argument, not whether you agree with his argument or disagree with his argument, but how he presents his argument. So in essence, you're going to be taking a pretty neutral, or not a pretty neutral, a neutral position on the subject itself. Very neutral position. And this is what it's asking you to do, to persuade his audience that the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, which was the subject of the passage, should not be developed for industry. In your essay, analyze how Carter uses one or more of the features listed in the box above. And we figured out that those features are basically asking you about ethos, pathos, and logos. But, if you determine some other feature that you would like to use, you can. And that is in parentheses. Me, I would stick with what is not in parentheses, because it's quite clear that we're being asked to take a look at the author's rhetorical use of the language. And it's obvious, at least to me, that we're talking about ethos, pathos, and logos. So I would really try to stick to those. But, you're not limited to that, let's just say. To strengthen the logic and persuasiveness of his argument. Now be sure that your analysis focuses on the most relevant features of the passage. Focuses on the most relevant features of the passage. So that means you're not going to start pulling stuff out of the air, creating stuff that's not there, coming out of your head with things. I mean, you're not, this is not what you want to do here, especially when you're being explicitly asked, meaning very clearly asked not to do that. But if, in case you missed what they're asking you to do or not do in this case, they made it very clear in this last part. Your essay should not explain whether you agree with Carter's claims. I mean, I don't think there is language strong enough. I mean, unless, they wanted to get like crazy and say, you better not explain whether you agree or disagree with what Carter said. I mean, that's probably the only other way they could have said it that would be maybe stronger. It wouldn't be polite, but it definitely would be stronger. But rather explain how Carter builds an argument to persuade his audience. So they're clarifying. They said it twice. So this is, in essence, something very serious. Okay, so what I did is I learned how to strip away the subject in order to fully understand how I can apply this question to anything that I read or anything they're going to give me. Because obviously, you're not going to have a passage about Jimmy Carter. Obviously. So how can I apply this to anything that I am faced with? Well, that's easy, and let's do it now. Voila. There it is. I stripped away all references to the passage, and this strip actually goes with pretty much every essay that we have available for the new SAT right now. So let's read it without, the subject matter. Write an essay in which you explain how blank builds an argument to persuade his or her audience, because we don't know whether it's going to be his or her, that blank, the subject, should not be blank, the position on the subject. In your essay, analyze how blank, whatever his name is or her name is, uses one or more of the features listed in the box above, or features of your own choice, to strengthen the logic and persuasiveness of his or her argument. Be sure that your analysis focuses on the most relevant features of the passage. Your essay should not explain whether you agree with blank, whoever blank is, the author, but rather how he is, blank, I'm sorry, whoever the author is, builds an argument to persuade his or her audience. This is the strip. So I stripped away the content, and now we pretty much can apply this to anything, not only anything that they may have us to read on SAT, but anything that you may read where an author is taking a position on a particular subject. And you want to know that little tidbit because you want to practice, and as of right now there are not a whole lot of practice essays that you can do. So you need to have some kind of idea of how you can go about finding or using other material that you yourself can find. Now let's get down to the business of writing an essay, and I have to say that I was able to create a template, basically a fill-in-the-blank template that can be applied to any passage with this particular question. A template where it's very simple, where you can just simply, fill in the blanks, and it works. Really, I was actually surprised at how well it works, because when I first took a look at the new SAT essay, I just made the assumption that, okay, those who used to memorize essays or even templates, they can forget it this time. It's not happening. Well, actually, I proved myself wrong by finding such an effective template that I was actually shocked. Much more effective than anything on the old SAT or current SAT, whenever you're watching this video. Anything that I have ever seen anyone try to use, much better than that. Without, cheating on the core of what the College Board is trying to assess you on. This, the template that I came up with I'm getting all tongue-tied. Came up with was pretty good. Okay, so let us begin. If you would like to continue and learn how to create your essay, SAT essay, through the template that I have managed to come up with. And if you would like to learn about other strategies that I've figured out for the new SAT that may help maximize your score, if you're in Egypt, of course, give me a call. That is, of course, 2010-6477-8726. But if you're not in Egypt, I still can help you. Just email me, send me an email at Mr. Quick at MrQuicksClass.com, and we can figure out a way to assist you in your score maximizing hopes or endeavors, your score maximizing endeavors. Okay, so that pretty much concludes part 4. But if you like to continue part 4, give me a call, and we can deal with that. This was very fun. You know, at first I thought this was going to be a challenge to a point that I didn't think I was going to be able to complete it, but it actually turned out to be fun and a learning experience. And I'm really happy, and I must say, with my last point, I'm really impressed with the College Board, especially with the new SAT essay. They created something that hits right on point on what students should be able to do going into first, second year university, and I'm 100% certain that universities are going to be requiring this essay, without a doubt. I have no doubt in my mind that that's going to happen. But, you know, I could be wrong. We'll see. At any rate, that's it for me. I am out of here.
Hey, howdy. This is an Islamic school. I'll talk about tomorrow. Yeah, that's rolling the hard way. We don't want to roll quite that hard. We want to get one of them little mini buses. What's up? Yo, and 14. What's up?
Tell you what, a person who believes that this wasn't set up by our own government is an idiot.
Everybody's gone out of their mind.
Welcome to Mr. Quick's class.
Welcome to Mr. Quick's class. Welcome to Mr. Quick's class. Welcome, Mr. Quick's class.
Oh, yeah. All right. All right.